That summer, the wild grass along the red dirt road still stretched out as if change had never touched this place. The breeze carried the earthy scent and the raw musk of cattle, mingling with the calls of distant birds lost in the vast blue sky. On nearly 100 acres of land in the remote outskirts of Wyoming, old man John Miller lived a simple life, as if the outside world didn't exist. He had no social media, no smartphone, and no idea what NFTs or the stock market were. All he knew were the seasons of sowing and harvesting, and the quiet whistle of wind slipping through his withered wooden fences. His home, a faded gray timber house, had been built in the 1930s by his father's own hands. It stood there, solitary and stubborn, just like its owner. John had lived here his entire life. Born and raised on this land, he buried his wife beneath the trees at the western edge of the field. Her tombstone read, Mary Miller, wife, mother, keeper of the land. Since her passing, he had not left the ranch for more than a week. It was a promise he made. He wasn't wealthy. His old pickup truck was over 2 decades old, the tractor sometimes had to be started with a knock to the engine, and his rubber boots always had a small hole near the left heel. But John never felt lacking. Every morning he brewed coffee over a wood-burning stove and sat in a creaky rocking chair to watch the sunrise stain the fields gold. To him, those moments were more valuable than any gilded mansion in the city. But then, things began to change. It started in early June when the first shiny black SUV appeared on the dirt road leading to his ranch. 3 men stepped out, young, sharply dressed, their leather shoes gleaming, and oversized sunglasses concealing eager eyes. They smiled at John with that kind of smile, the kind of people who were certain they'd already won. Mr. Miller, one of them said, extending a hand. I'm Thomas Wayne, representing Evergrow Development. We've come with an offer, a very generous one. John shook his hand, eyes cool. I'm not selling. The man hesitated, clearly surprised, but kept his polished smile. You haven't even heard the price, sir. $2 million. Cash. You could retire, travel the world, buy a lake house. I don't need to travel, and I already have a home. It's here. The second man, with slick back hair and a confident tone, chimed in. We're planning to transform this entire area into a world-class resort, golf courses, commercial centers, luxury villas, fine dining. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Everyone else has agreed to sell, you're the only holdout. John looked out over the fields. A hawk floated high above, wings spread wide, gliding slowly. He stayed silent, then slowly turned and walked into the house, leaving the 3 men stunned on the porch. They came back in the following days, this time with folders, maps, handwritten proposals, and promises to name a street after him. They said he could live out his days like a king. All he had to do was sign. But John didn't sign. He had once been a Marine. He knew the value of keeping your word and standing by what you believe is right. This land wasn't just property, it was memory, legacy, the resting place of his family and a part of his soul. When temptation failed, they changed tactics. This time, it was legal threats. One morning, John received a thick envelope bearing the seal of the court. They claimed the land was under dispute, that part of it belonged to a distant relative who had supposedly signed over development rights to Evergrow years ago, a vague but legally viable agreement. John took the letter to his old friend and lawyer, Harris, who had gone to grade school with him. Harris frowned as he read through the documents, then sighed. John, if they really have a valid original document, we might be in serious trouble. But this land belonged to my father. I've never left. Justice doesn't always side with the truth. Sometimes, it sides with whoever pays more. And so, the inevitable came. One summer morning, as John was feeding the cattle, the sheriff's blue pickup pulled up to the gate. The sheriff stepped out, visibly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, John. I really didn't want to be the one to do this. He handed over the eviction notice. The court has ruled. You have 72 hours to vacate the property. John said nothing. He took the paper and walked back into the house. In the kitchen, he made himself a cup of coffee. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, anger. He stood by the window, looking out at the fields. The cattle grazed as always. The hawk still circled overhead. The world went on as if nothing had changed. But for John, everything had fallen apart. 3 days later, he left. With only his old truck, a few clothes, his radio, and a photo of Mary on the passenger seat. No one came to say goodbye. No protests. No reporters. Just silence. He parked under a large tree by an old dirt trail where he and Mary used to have picnics in the 80s. The wind was still. The sky was clear. Night fell slowly. He couldn't sleep. The radio played a sad country ballad, the singer's voice cracking like a heartbreaking in slow motion. John looked at the photo. "I'm sorry, Mary. I couldn't protect our home." His tears fell not with noise or drama, but quiet and slow, like water finding its way through old stone. A man who had lost everything, not because he was reckless, but because others were greedy. He didn't know where he'd go next. No land. No livestock. No place to call home. But then, at the darkest moment, the unexpected began. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, just as the first sunlight broke through the fog, a deep rumble echoed from the distance. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The unmistakable sound of rotor blades. A sound he hadn't heard since war, a sound you never forget. He opened the truck door and looked up. And then, his eyes widened. A U.S. Apache helicopter, with the American flag clearly painted on both sides, was descending, landing squarely in the very field he'd been forced to abandon not 24 hours earlier. The ground shook. Dust flew. The grass bent low. The chopper door swung open. And from it stepped a man in military uniform, dark sunglasses, walking with decisive purpose. John stared, heart pounding. He recognized him instantly, even after more than 30 years. David. His younger brother. The helicopter blade slowed, the engine whined once more before fading into silence. The dust had settled. And there, on the very land he had been forced to abandon, stood David Miller, John's younger brother, long lost and thought never to return, now emerging from the morning haze like a ghost from the past. John didn't move right away. He just stared. Stared at the man in uniform who looked hardened by time but still carried the same eyes, those of a boy who once skipped school to follow his big brother to the fields, who cried silently when their mother passed, and who now stood with a quiet, determined fire. "John," David said, voice rough like the fading thrum of the rotors. "I heard, through a contact at the Pentagon. They were wrong, big brother. Those bastards think land is just numbers on a spreadsheet." John said nothing. He looked out over the field where the grass was still bent from the helicopter's arrival, as if the land itself had bowed for a moment. David stepped closer, placing a firm hand on John's shoulder. "I'm not going to let them erase our family's legacy. I don't care if I have to call in every favor I've got. I'll fight, John." John gave a slight nod, his gaze distant. He knew this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about identity. About dignity. About all the people who quietly lived their lives and got steamrolled by forces too big to see. For the next few days, John lived in a small cabin on the edge of a nearby town, a converted old tool shed offered to him by a neighbor with more kindness than means. There, surrounded by cracked wooden walls and the musty scent of age, John sat still in the evenings, as if waiting for something to change. He missed the early sounds of the ranch, no more cattle calling, no smoke rising from the wood stove, no soft footfalls of Mary walking the dirt path with his coffee in hand. Now, there was only the rumble of semi-trucks down the highway and the glaring billboards of Evergrow's dream. The new future of the West. Future. They used that word like a blade slicing through history. John's past wasn't glamorous. It was carved out of dirt and sweat and stubbornness. His grandfather, Samuel Miller, had staked the first claim on that land during the Great Migration in the early 1900s. He built the first house with bare hands and calloused hope, planted wheat, raised cattle, and died one brutal winter saving a calf from a snowstorm. John's father, Harold, carried on the work with backbreaking devotion. He never left the land, not once. "This dirt has my blood," he'd say, "and someday it'll have yours." John grew up knowing that freedom came with hard labor and cracked skin. His hands were never soft, his back always sore, but his soul was steady. That land gave him purpose. It gave him Mary. He left once, when the war came. He enlisted, served, saw the world's darkness, and came back. Because Mary had written in her last letter before deployment, "You have to come home. Not just for me, but for the land." He did. And unlike David, who stayed in the military and climbed ranks, John returned to the ranch. No medals, no ceremony. Just a quiet man and his soil. Then Evergrow came. They didn't arrive with guns or tanks. They came with lawyers, zoning plans, sleek suits, and empty smiles. They didn't steal the land, they suffocated it with contracts and paperwork. And John wasn't the only one. His elderly neighbor, Eunice, 84, was coerced into selling her century-old cottage to make room for a parking lot. Franklin, the local blacksmith who'd shoed horses for decades, lost his workshop after being threatened with the revocation of his operating permit. An entire town was being swallowed whole by the word progress. John sat up late at night listening to an old cassette tape, Mary's voice, recorded years ago. "John, if the land ever feels like something to sell instead of something to live for, remember, this is where we loved each other." Reuniting with David wasn't just a tender family moment, it was the spark that would light something far bigger. David, now a strategic military advisor with deep contacts in the Department of Defense, had uncovered something Evergrow didn't know. The Miller Ranch sat directly on top of a classified national data corridor, part of a Cold War-era communications line. Digging or developing on that land without federal oversight would violate multiple security regulations. "They don't know," David said. "But now they're going to." The brothers laid out a plan, not just to challenge Evergrow in court with this new information, but to tell the world what was really happening, how a man was evicted not by bulldozers, but by greed, and how a family's legacy was being destroyed under the guise of modernization. David called in favors. He reached out to veteran groups, local reporters, farmer advocacy networks. Within weeks, John's story spread beyond Wyoming. It hit the regional papers, then the national news. The last man on the land. A life for soil, then forced to leave it. When progress paves over the past. Evergrow panicked. Their PR team scrambled. They held press conferences. They tried spinning the story, claiming John voluntarily relocated to enable progress. But a single video clip, John's voice cracking as he said, "I just want to die where I was born," spread like wildfire. People believed him. Because he wasn't an actor. He wasn't political. He was just real. Between mounting public pressure and David's formal security disclosures to the federal government, the state was forced to halt all development by Evergrow pending review. 1 week later, John got a call from the mayor's office. "Mr. Miller, we're revisiting the case. There's a strong chance you'll get your land back." John didn't cry. But his hands, old and calloused, clenched so tightly that the knuckles turned white. That night, he and David sat outside the small cabin. The stars were bright, brighter than they'd been in years. The air was cold but not cruel. "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner," David said. John took a long breath. "You came back when I needed you most. That's what matters." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of wind and crickets. A faint country tune played from the cabin's radio, this one not sad, but steady. And then came the voices, messages from people all over the country. Farmers, veterans, mothers, activists. All calling in, saying, "I stand with John. We need more men like him. That land is America, not a resort." John didn't smile much, but that night, he did. A small, quiet smile, The kind a man wears when he realizes that for the first time in a long while, he's not alone. The fight wasn't over, but it had begun on his terms. The sun rose slowly over the small town. Morning mist still clung to withered fences and the gnarled roots of ancient trees, silent witnesses to time's passage. But something was different in the air today. A feeling of anticipation, as if everything was holding its breath before the final storm. John Miller stood in front of the Fremont County Courthouse, wearing a worn denim shirt with frayed collar edges, though cleaned and pressed. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the emotion swelling deep within. Beside him stood David, his younger brother, no longer in uniform but in a khaki jacket, holding a thick file packed with evidence, documents, and federal maps. This was it. The final hearing. A chance not just to reclaim land, but to reclaim honor. Across the room sat representatives from Evergrow, 3 men in tailored suits, faces stiff, eyes not meeting John's but staring through him as if he were invisible. John didn't bring a lawyer. He had spent a lifetime speaking through action. But today, he would speak from the heart. He stepped up to the hearing stand, his face lean but resolute. His voice echoed, slow and hoarse but warm. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to remind you that some things aren't for sale, and land is one of them. Land is not just property. It's memory. It's where I grew up, where my wife passed away, where my father broke his back, and my grandfather buried his dreams. Silence fell across the courtroom. They'll show you blueprints and numbers and promise thousands of jobs. But they can't show you a soul. If we keep paving over the past in the name of progress, there won't be anything worth saving in the future. His voice cracked slightly, but his eyes never wavered. David stood from his seat and submitted the classified federal documents about the underground data corridor running beneath the ranch. The council murmured. Faces once passive began to shift. 2 weeks later, a rusted pickup truck pulled up in front of the Miller Ranch's broken gate. The door creaked open, and John stepped out, eyes scanning the red earth stretching into the horizon. He had won. The court ruled in John Miller's favor. His land would be returned. Evergrow's development plans were permanently suspended. They were ordered to pay damages and evaluate from the Fremont area within 90 days. The townsfolk didn't celebrate with fireworks or champagne. They came by bike, by battered trucks. They brought hot coffee, cornbread, and warm hugs. We always believed in you, John. You didn't just keep the land, you kept this town's spirit alive. John said little. He stood in the old house, his hand resting on the doorframe Mary once touched every morning. The scratches in the wood were still there, like wrinkles on a beloved face, carved by time and love. David stayed a few more weeks. The brothers repaired fences, repainted the old house. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, sipping coffee, listening to the old radio hum. News still talked of politics, war, and markets, but somehow, beneath the static, it felt like something had shifted, as if John's story reminded people what truly mattered. A television crew arrived for an interview. When asked if the victory felt worth it, John simply smiled. I didn't win anything. I just stood my ground. And sometimes, just standing your ground is a miracle in itself. A month later, John received a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged. Dear Mr. Miller, I'm an architecture student. I read about you and your land. For the first time, I understand that not everything modern is right. I hope someday to visit your ranch and hear your stories. Thank you for not giving up. He folded the letter, tears brimming, not from pride, but relief. He knew now that what he protected wasn't just soil. It was a way of life. On a crisp autumn morning, David returned to his post. The brothers hugged beneath the old oak by the porch. No words were needed. Their handshake was heavy with promise. We won't let them take what matters again. John stood there long after David left. The wind swept through the fields. In the distance, cows called out. The land was alive again, and so was he. He stepped inside and turned on the tape deck. Mary's voice played, aged and soft, but unwavering. John, if you're listening to this, it means you're still where we loved each other. Don't let anyone make you forget what this place means. I love you. And I'm proud you never gave up. John closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down, slowly. He didn't wipe it away. He let it fall into the land, as if returning to the place he belonged. And you know what? This isn't just a story about one man, one piece of land, or one courtroom. It's a story about belief, memory, and the right to live true to what we value most. If this story moved your heart, if it made you think about what matters in your own life, please consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and sharing this video with someone who may have forgotten that sometimes standing your ground is its own kind of fight. Thank you for watching. Be the keeper of something true in your life.